realize I had to join through where I created the meeting. So wonderful, and Christian's joined us as well. Jennifer is here. So really the purpose of tonight is to walk you through the key components of the logic model assignment, which is due a week from today, and to kind of give you an insight into things that I think will be helpful for you to know in terms of the way we grade these assignments, what we're looking for. So I want to get to your questions in a minute, but I just wanted to cover a few key topics that I think are helpful for your class. The first piece of this that I think is critical is to remember that this is a pretty short assignment. It's 4 pages long. The first question that students usually have when I say that is, oh no, what if I go over? And I'm like, that's okay. If you need 5 or maybe 5.5 or 6 pages, that is okay. But just know that I do not penalize you for, concise thinking. So for example, section 1 of the logic model is really describing what logic models are. So you are going through this introduction, what's a logic model, how do logic models inform social work practice, and what are the key limitations of logic models? You can really knock that out in 1 paragraph. I'm looking for maybe 2 sentences that hit on each of those questions. So don't use your entire 4 pages to explain to me what a logic model is, how they're used in social work practice and what the limitations are. Just list a few key things. Does anybody have any comments or questions about stage 1? Because that's really the most generic part of the assignment. Okay. That one is straightforward. And remember, you use 1 citation from your Royce book, so our blue program evaluation book, and the other one you can just use an additional citation. So you can use, we've been referencing and sending you, for example, to the University of Wisconsin-Madison's logic model website. You can use a citation from that. You can use a citation from Google Scholar, anywhere that, you have found a logic model explanation that really resonates with you and what you're trying to do. And then from that point, your assignment really gets more customized. So number 2, the second part is you are describing the program and service for which the logic model should be created. So if I were to take the easiest route in this assignment, which I'm highly encouraging you to do so, I would copy and paste this from step 5 of your needs assessment assignment. So remember, there is no self-plagiarism in this class, right? One thing builds off the other. So the purpose of the final section, section 5 of the needs assessment assignment, was for you to actually propose or develop a service or program that you are then going to use for the remainder of this class to develop around the logic model and then to evaluate when we get into the final assignment, which is the program evaluation assignment. So since we're a small group, I think it would be cool to go around the room and for you to each tell me what the program or service that you are doing entails, like what the name of it is and a little bit about that. So because that will help us really shape our thinking and ideas around like what really needs to go into the logic model. So Dylan, would you mind going first?
Yeah, that's okay. I don't really have a concrete name right now for my program, still kind of working on that. But so mine is based on a skilled nursing facility. I've been working at the same one I had my bachelor's field placement at as like a kind of intermediate employee for about a year now or so. And I just kind of realized skilled nursing facilities are majorly focused on physical health. And I just kind of talking with other people there, we just think like there could be a more effort to focus on mental health. And with the pandemic, just doing intake assessments and everything, I noticed anxiety was like one of the main mental health issues the residents were facing there. So the program is basically just designed to help all key personnel who are in charge of helping or basically in charge of taking care of the residents while they're at the skilled nursing facility just educating them about how to create a more welcoming and warm environment for those with anxiety, like how to set it up in a way where it lessens their anxiety, explaining stuff more, spending more time with the residents and everything.
Yes.
And also just getting them more familiar with the different treatments that are used and the different screening methods. So that way they kind of know how they determine they have anxiety, or if they have some subsyndrome anxiety, which is they don't have enough symptoms to be formally diagnosed, also kind of the differences with that. And just the mental health professionals just being aware of more non-pharmacological kind of interventions that are useful also.
Yes. Oh my goodness. This is so exciting. This is actually the perfect program for us to start out with talking about, because you've listed the key components and what needs to go into the logic model. You know, you're talking about the need and the rationale for the logic model, which is, you know, grounded in your lived experience, grounded in your needs assessment, but also grounded in the literature. And then you're talking about the different components, like what do we actually need to make this go? So if we are going to do like an enhanced, you know, mental health program, or, you know, counseling program, or program to educate around anxiety, like what are the actual activities that need to go into preparing the staff to be trained in these kinds of modalities? So, you know, you mentioned like we need better screening. We need to implement a screening protocol with our residents or with our patients. You know, we need to train our staff on types of anxiety. We need to also train them on non-pharmacy based interventions as well. And so all of that, Dylan, can go into your logic model in various stages, because you're actually talking about inputs, but then you're also talking about activities and participation. Like what kind of participation do you need from the staff in order to make this go? So that's a really well developed idea. It's just probably more about like placing this across the logic model. So great, you're on the right track. Christian, since you popped up next on the screen, do you want to tell us a little bit about your idea?
Okay, so mine is within the organization that I'm currently employed at, and also doing my practicum there. And the idea is to open a sober living facility for women. The area that I live in does not really offer a whole lot of aftercare services to begin with, let alone for women in recovery. So the facility has opened a men's sober living. So I'm like, why can't we open one for women? And to go with that, this is just from personal experience of working in the field. We've had a lot of repeat clients because they go to sober living facilities that don't offer some sort of program to work with it, like an intensive outpatient program. Mm-hmm. So the idea is to have an intensive outpatient program that the clients of the sober living facility could attend 3 days a week, and also attend outside AA and NA meetings as a requirement, and have them find employment as well to start the accountability and responsibility process before completely transitioning out on their own. We would definitely need more staff. We would need more RAs, peer supports, clinical staff to teach the groups. And I also wanted to incorporate the use of MAT in with the facility too, because a lot of sober living facilities do not accept clients who are on Suboxone or methadone treatment. And actually, the men's sober living facility that is open, done some interviews at work. They are using the CORE grant for funding, and part of the requirement is that the individual has to be on some sort of MAT treatment to be accepted into the facility. So we would be incorporating another provider to prescribe the medications. the IOP program, like I said. I think that's covers all of it.
Yes. Well, I mean, I love this idea, Christian, because it's so lofty and it's so exciting because you are really proposing, like, in contrast to what Dylan is doing. Dylan is like working on a unit and is like, this is what the unit is missing. There's this one key component. You're really building something from the ground up. So, like, almost the way I would approach your logic model is a similar way that I would approach to potentially writing like a large scale grant, because you've listed off so many services and you're looking at brick and mortar too. So it's like building the facility, hiring the staff, hiring a prescribing physician so that you can incorporate MAT, thinking about employment and placement and integration and coordination with other services in your area. So I would almost start maybe even listening back to this recording and like listen to yourself talk about it is so exciting, but also like recording everything that you listed and then just starting from there to organize. So for example, like what of these activities fall into the inputs? What are they, in terms of activities, in terms of participation, in terms of what needs to be developed in order to make this facility run, and then trying to like really work on mapping all of that out together.
Okay.
It's like the first part. And then
so even like having a building would be on the logic model.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Whereas like Dylan's starting from a place, he's like, I don't need a building. We're already working in like skilled nursing rehab. I just need the staff to be trained to be able to do this. And we need a screening system. We need training. We need like an integration of this needed service within our existing services. You're like, I need to build everything. Yeah. I had a former student that really did something similar to you, Christian, where she looked at, she wanted to build a grocery store in her neighborhood that was considered a food desert. And she really had to think about, organizing all of these components of what it would really look like to build this from the ground up and fund it and all sorts of things. So you have a lot to work with, because it's not just a service integrated into existing services. It's like the entire program housed.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I think you should go for it. And I think it's a really good idea. So I think, okay, let's go to Abby really quick. And then we're going to next talk about with your projects, things that we want to increase and things that we want to decrease, because that gets us to our final piece of this, which is really looking at outcomes. So we want to think about the beginning, and then we think about the end, and then incorporating them. So Abby, remind me again about the program or service that you want to implement.
Yes, so I have a question about that actually. But I was focusing on the Salvation Army Veterans Transitional Housing Program. And when I did my needs assessment, I kind of had two ideas, but one of them was more so a policy change. So I didn't know if that would be something that would be applicable for this type of assignment.
Okay, well, talk us through the kind of policy change that you were thinking about.
Okay, so basically, so first off, the interviews that I had they weren't super great, because I know from working there that the things that they said were not entirely what's actually going on. So I tried to just go off of the interviews and not tapping into my own knowledge. But one of the things is they have a zero tolerance drug policy, and drug use has been a significant issue for a lot of the clients there. So in doing the research about like housing first policies and things like that, I was considering that changing that policy might be more in line with housing first policies, which the VA stands behind, because like the staff members that I interviewed weren't even really on the same page about what the zero tolerance policy looks like. One of them said that people who come in with marijuana in their system are allowed to come in as long as they give up marijuana. But the other staff member said no marijuana, like no drugs at all. So just like revamping that policy overall, to make it more clear, but also permit people with substance abuse issues to enter the facility.
Yes. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that policy change will work in this case because the policy will lead to a definitive program change. And I think having, zero tolerance policies in the literature is shown to not produce the best outcome. So I can give you an example. I'm working with a substance use disorder treatment research study in LA County currently, and we're looking at the most high performing programs. So ones that have the very best outcomes. And we're interviewing their service providers on like why they think they are the most successful. And one of the things that we're learning is that they have very high tolerance for people using substances, for people relapsing, sort of having this open door policy. And they're thinking behind that, the logic and the literature behind that is like, when people are ready, they need to know that they can re-engage with us, and so we tend to have a lot of flexibility. Uh-oh, okay, sorry, my 2-year-old has come down to say good night. Oh, okay, all right, good night. Sorry about that. I was not expecting that. Sorry, we're dealing with pink eye today after the stomach virus last week. So yeah, it's been a bumpy ride. So I think what you're saying is correct. Like it's grounded in literature. You're saying that the policy currently that's being implemented isn't even being implemented consistently. So how will this then impact a program change? So it might be, retraining with staff around housing first policies. It might need to be training and developing certain modules or manualizing certain housing first policies within the program. It might be incorporating MAT services into the housing program. So there's probably a lot of programs out there that you can look at for an evidence base to pull from to say like, well, what would be the programmatic components needed to make this policy change at the organization?
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. The other thing I was considering was establishing an in-house AA and NA meetings.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know if that would be more practical.
Well, I think the barrier, yes, I think integrating the two would be challenging. Because I think, maybe Christian too can like back me up or challenge me on this, is that often NAAA programs are the social model, whereas like housing first policies integrate more harm reduction and MAT components to them. So if you implement them both simultaneously, that might be a challenge.
Yeah, no, that wasn't really the intention. I was just thinking of one or the other.
Okay, one or the other. Yes, both. I think both can definitely work.
Okay.
Yeah, so good. Okay, and I think Jennifer, welcome, Brandon. Hi, thanks for joining us. And Brandon has done a really awesome video. I actually rewatched it right before tonight's session, where he really takes you through different steps, and that's in session 7. That's embedded in the steps, and that was really helpful for me to watch. Of like, okay, he's actually developing the logic model in real time and walking through the components with counseling / mental health, behavioral health facility that he was working with in Michigan. So that was really helpful, as well as another resource. Is Jennifer still on the call, or did she have to go? Okay, she's good. Okay, so I also wanted to pull up, let me share my screen really quickly here. So tonight, I was showing Brandon this earlier, but I think it's really helpful for us to think about. This is now under your assignments tab with logic models, because like we said earlier in the assignment for this, logic models are really vast. You can be quite creative in the way you think about them. We do want to see the components of like the inputs, outputs, and outcomes, but they're going to look different based on your program. So what I really like about this particular template is that it kind of has you plug in what you need from each of the areas. So like inputs is like what we invest. So that's really like what you're already bringing to the table. So I'm going to juxtapose maybe Dylan and Christian's model here and saying like, Dylan's is probably investing a lot already. So having like existing staff, potentially there's time and money if there's desire to implement or integrate mental health services in there. There's like materials, equipment, technology. For Christians, there might be less existing investment there because that you're really like having to build the program from ground up, but that's okay. You're listing what you have already there. So you might have less in terms of the inputs, but Christian might have more in terms of like activities and participations, because you might need to actually like hire and train staff. Whereas like Dylan will just have to like train them in like certain modalities, or like Abby, let's say you go for the pathway where you're going to implement more housing first policies. You already have staff. It sounds like you already have a building. You just need to train your existing staff and volunteers by potentially conducting workshops, rewriting policy and policy manuals around that, potentially developing curriculum, training. I think all three of yours might have to incorporate providing some sort of counseling and various partnerships that need to be established. Who we reach is going to be different for each of yours, right? So you want to think about who we reach as being pretty broad. So again, like it's not just your clients or your, workers that are going to be trained or retrained. It's also like, well, we might need to liaise with other organizations if we're integrating and coordinating care. We might have to look at, towards decision makers and policy makers if we are indeed changing policy. And then, they're also looking at like client satisfaction here as well. I may or may not include that in there because I'm not entirely sure how the client satisfaction would fit. I might actually move that more to an outcome than have it in the participation. But as you can see, like what we're sort of discussing for all of your projects is really the inputs and outputs. And you don't have to do this, but I actually really like these arrows with like the situation and the priorities, because it really brings into what we've talked about with the needs assessment as well. Like how are our inputs and outputs and the whole idea around this program grounded in, the needs that we've uncovered through our needs assessment assignment. So what I sort of think about when I conceptualize logic models is I would actually, if I were to redevelop them, have a bubble here that has like program implementation, because between outputs and outcomes, I'm like, well, a program was implemented, but for whatever reason, that's missing in all logic models. So it's an invisible area between the outputs and outcomes where you want to think about, okay, this is where we actually implement our program. This is where, we do housing first policy change. This is where we build a sober living facility. This is where we actually train all of our staff and implement a mental health program. And then, your outcomes are really like dreaming about the future. You're really thinking about, okay, well, what will change immediately after the implementation of this? So I like how they break this down into terms of like, well, what's really possible short-term and long-term? And what you could think about short-term are like increasing and decreasing certain like learning, awareness, knowledge, attitude, skills, opinions. And what they say is more medium is like you're actually changing behavior, you're changing action, because that takes some time. Like you're going to train your staff and then you're going to increase their knowledge, but their actual behavior towards the clients might not change overnight. That might take some longer term reinforcement of the training. That might take cultural change in your organization. That might mean integrating certain aspects of the new program into their work plan in terms of how they're evaluated as employees. You can see that could take longer. And then the ultimate impacts are pretty lofty, but I like the way that they're conceptualized in this example, because you want to think about them as like, how do we want to change society? How do we want to change our community? How do we want to change our environment? So you want to think of these as like increasing things and decreasing things. So like in, Christian's example of the sober living facility, like if this facility is available, the community might experience, better support for women, let's say, or female identifying people, better support for mothers, so better outcomes for children. You want to think about like the ripple effects that your program will have on the larger community. Christian was talking about employment training. So like how will better employment training better the community as well? So you want to think of those as more lofty, more long-term goals. Does that make sense?
Those were things I hadn't thought of, because the only two that had came to mind for the long term for me was to reduce recidivism rates of them continuously coming back to the inpatient treatment and getting them to like a long-term sobriety, like 1 year or more. Yeah. So I hadn't even thought of what you had mentioned as far as helping society as a whole, helping them grow as an individual and be better people, better mothers. So that was helpful.
Good. Well, yeah, and those are sometimes harder to think about because I tend to like be more humble in what I think is even possible with a program implementation, but like I really think they're important to consider. That's why I like this template and how they label them, like societal, economic, social conditions of the community. How can they be changed? And the other thing I wanted to think about is like sometimes, I don't know, logic models can be really tricky until you start putting them on paper. But I also want you to think about them as like, these are so necessary. If let's say you were a director of a program, a director of, the Salvation Army, or like a large scale substance use disorder treatment, or like a director of a long-term care facility, or a network of them. Like this is what you would actually use to get funding for your program. You would have to show a logic model to be able to show funders, like, look, we have laid this out, we have organized this is a plan of action. It's like, these are all the things we already have. This is what we need to input in terms of activities and participation in order to make this run, in order to make sure everyone's trained, to make sure everyone's on board. Then we're going to implement it. And this is how we're actually going to measure change in our clients, in the community. And so it's a really good way of thinking about organizing this to be able to prepare yourself to, accept a large grant or apply for a large grant. So I know I've been talking for quite some time, but what questions do you all have about the logic model assignment that's coming up?
I just had a quick question about inputs. So were you saying that inputs are only things that they already have, not things that we need?
So it's tricky because different templates label them different. So this labels them as like what we invest. So if you were to show this to a potential grant funder, like the Humana Community Partners Foundation, you would be like, okay, here's what we're bringing to the table. And then here's like, with your money, this is what we're going to develop. Like, we're going to make sure we implement all of these activities. And I kind of like that approach because you're really being honest about like, these are existing inputs And then this is yet to what we have to develop. However, not depending on the template that you use, they can be a little blurry.
Okay.
I don't know, Brandon, what do you think about that?
I think I like that assessment of it. I'm not sure that I have anything to add.
I think that's kind of how you did yours too, right? Because you were working like within an existing program.
Yeah, I think it could be hard to list things as inputs that aren't already in existence. I think that could be a hard way to look at it. Not that you couldn't do it that way, but yeah, especially if you're trying to get funding and you're trying to instill other people to get on board with your idea, that could be a challenge.
Well, and the reality is Brandon and I aren't really going to know either way too. Like we're going to believe you because we can't see under the hood of the car at your organization. So if you tell us there's time and money like willing to be invested in your idea, we will definitely believe you.
All right. Thank you.
Are we putting one of these charts actually in the paper?
Yes. So
Okay.
the assignment is a 4-page paper, and this is one of the pages. So one of the things that stresses students out about this assignment is that it's actually quite short. Like it's really 3 pages of your writing, which is really a narrative of you're walking us through these steps and putting this chart into a narrative format. And really writing around each of these steps. But this logic model template should be one of the 4 pages.
Okay. And you said it's okay if we go over, because I feel like starting something completely brand new, I may have to go over 4 pages.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
I have a draft of a chart like this already. Can I email that to you guys to
Yeah.
get some feedback on?
Yes, of course. We've been looking at, various drafts from students all week. So yes, of course. How are you doing, Dylan?
My question's more simple, I guess, in a way. I was just wondering, do you want us to have like all the sections listed here, like on the screen, like inputs, activities, participation, short, medium, and long term? Are we able just to have like inputs, activities, like kind of short term, medium term kind of mix, and then long term? Or did
Yes.
you want?
Yeah, and in fact, that is actually the way like the example is written and the assignment is written, is that I believe they collapse the short term and medium term into one. So there's like, it's sort of like immediate, I forget the way it's worded, but it's like immediate outcomes and then long-term outcomes. And this is just one example that I just really like because I think it's clear. You all have to do this section with situation, priorities, assumptions, or external factors. I think it's helpful to consider these, but you don't have to include them. So external factors, I think, is really important, like when there is potentially a large scale policy change coming underway. So like the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, that really changed a lot of services within behavioral health. So like acknowledging that within the diagram is an important factor to see like, oh, and now here's how our services are going to change, but it makes more sense for some projects than others. So this just gives you some examples, but yeah, you feel free to adjust this in any way you see fit. But the main components that are the most important to include is the inputs, outputs, and outcomes.
Okay. And like, would you say the sweet spot for each category is like 4 or like 4 or 5? Because there's like a lot of stuff that could go in there. It's kind of just trying to figure out what the most important stuff is. So try to aim for like maybe 4 bullet points per category is like a good idea.
Yes, I would say that would work. Yeah, between 4 and 5 typically, depending on the size and scale of what you're doing. I mean, I think that would make a lot of sense, Dylan, for yours, because you're really like working within an existing program and adding, one extra thing to the set of services that already exist.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
What other things are you seeing as like challenges or barriers in this assignment? Or questions that are popping up? I can also pull up the assignment. So we've already talked about section 1. We've talked about section 2, which you have already really developed in your needs assessment assignment. And then the logic model template is number 3. And that's, that completed logic model template is sort of what I just showed you. And then the narrative. So the narrative is really your descriptions. And you use citational evidence as appropriate. So you don't have really the requirement of justifying every single activity and every single task with a citation. But like if you're creating a strong rationale for wanting something to be represented in your narrative that might not be like intuitive or logical, maybe you are doing something really innovative, you might want to back that up with a citation just to show like this is indeed grounded in literature. Like Abby, for example, it might not be intuitive for a lot of people that like what housing first policies look like and like why they aren't helpful in many ways when people are undergoing substance use disorder treatment. And so maybe backing that up with some citational evidence there. And then, you're really laying out the narrative of describing your inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, etc. And then the last part, again, like the introduction, these last parts can just be really quick, like a couple of sentences on how the logic model will assist with the evaluation design. And the secret to that is really looking at your outcomes. Because when we get into evaluation, which is really like the last third of this course, we're getting into like measurement. We're getting into this idea of like, how do we measure what is going to increase and what's going to decrease amongst your population of focus? So how is your logic model going to assist with the evaluation of design? That's really going to be in your outcomes. So like, what are you going to measure? How are you going to conceptualize looking at change? The other thing, this week we're talking about sampling, like potentially what kind of sampling strategy are you going to use? Would you use probability or non-probability sampling? One of the when I'm thinking about each of your programs, it seems like potentially a non-probability approach would work well because none of you are taking on, let's say, like the entire child welfare system in the state of Kentucky. You're both working within very specific organizations. So you could also talk about sampling strategy, like in order to measure change over time within the evaluation, we are going to use, purposive sampling or quota sampling or convenience sampling to try to outreach to as many clients as we can or as many patients as we can to try to understand how this policy change or this program or this training impacted their mental health or their substance use or housing permanency. So that could be for number 4, just to give you some ideas. And then any concluding thoughts about logic model and the impact on the program, agency, and community being served. So just, you could even crunch 4 and 5 together into like one conclusion, like short conclusion paragraph.
So I think the only other part that I'm struggling with, because I need to think broader, I guess. So in the outputs, the participation part, who we reach, like right now, all that's in my head are the clients or obviously the community, I feel like it would help the community.
Yes.
But would, outside of that, would you be reaching the people that are going to be working for the program as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think so, because they would need a certain level of like training. And you could even list out the different roles, because one of the like, you've thought this through a lot, Christian, like even like the different roles, like who are you even going to need to reach to hire? Like if you're incorporating an MAT program, you're going to need a prescribing physician on site. You're going to have to try to figure out, are you doing, you know, like buprenorphine, Suboxone, methadone, you know, each of those have different treatment protocols, different requirements in terms of like who can administer them. You know,
so am I going to list that just as participants, or am I going to put a provider, case managers, peer support specialists?
I think you could list all of them out, because then really link to, you know, a lot of those people would be considered like key decision makers. Potentially you're going to liaise with other agencies in order to be able to integrate and coordinate care in that way. And then they could also link to like what we do. So it could also link to like the kinds of training and resources that will be available at the facility.
Okay.
And you don't have to go into a lot of detail, but I just think like representing them, because you are building a whole program from the ground up, like representing that you've thought out all the key components of what you need to do to make this program run.
Okay.
Whereas I think Dylan and Abby, you know, you would not need to, you might have your clients and you might have employees at the organization. It might be more scaled back. And then you could represent different people. Like, you know, Dylan, were you thinking about training all the staff on, you know, mental health intervention? Like more of that, what is that mantra that I hear some human service organizations use, that like everybody that works here is the clinician. So anybody from the cleaning staff to transportation, at any moment you could have to shift into clinician mode. So we train everybody that's involved in the organization. Is that the kind of approach that you would want to take, or would you only want to train people that are administering the mental health treatment? Or would you want to include, let's say, CNAs and other staff, transportation providers, etc.?
So I was kind of thinking like to have not everybody like trained as a clinician, but be aware of like the different kind of interventions, or just like the basic kind of knowledge about how to handle, like if someone was going through a rough like patch of anxiety, if they are diagnosed with it, if they're just getting there and having subcentrial anxiety symptoms like at an extreme level or something, just like know how to handle until they could find someone, and just kind of like, I guess it would be kind of like a quick crisis response they would be able to do quickly until like an actual clinician could get there in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then I might include them. Like anybody that you feel needs to have like some sort of training or educational awareness of this new program might be included in section, which would be the participation section. So anything else that you can think of? Well, I think you all seem really prepared. I mean, you all three have a very well developed idea. It's more just like putting it down on paper and conceptualizing it and filling out the list along the way, and then really just writing around it. You want to think about, I sort of think of this as like a grant application in many ways, even though it's not really, but like you lay out the map, and then in the narrative, you're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Let's say you were funded. It would be like an explanation of the map. Like that's what funders would want to look at, or an explanation of your action plan. Brandon, am I forgetting anything or anything that you think it would be important to add?
I think you covered everything.
Well, if there's no extra questions or additional questions, also feel free to reach out to us this week. Feel free to send us any drafts that you want us to look at, either your logic model or anything, before next Tuesday. We're happy to look over this. And remember, this is a little bit easier. I think the course gets easier from here on out because all you're doing is creating a proposal. It's not like you're collecting data like you did for the needs assessment. You're not analyzing data. Now we're just in like the pie in the sky thinking mode, which is an exciting place to be.
It seems so much harder though to put it on paper when you have all the ideas bouncing around everywhere, but then to explain them out so everyone understands just.
Yes, I know. I find logic models really tricky. Like I think that certain students, like they think this way already and they map them out, but I need to look at a lot of different templates. I almost need to like create a list and then plug it in and then plug it in a new direction and then step back and look at it and go back in and rearrange things to see how it all fits together. But I would say really the most important, if we were to like hone in on what's the most important about piece of this assignment and then like what transfers to the next phase of this class, it's really the outcomes. It's really looking and planning for like the increases and the decreases, the improvements that you want to make, the changes that you want to make, because that is the piece that you then bring with you. So you've brought like a part of the needs assessment assignment, which is you've found the need for the program, you've developed the program, you've thought about what it looks like, then you're bringing that to the logic model. And then we have our logic model assignment, and then what you're pulling through to the next assignment, the program evaluation, it's really the increases and decreases and how we're going to measure those in the final assignment, the program evaluation. So we're almost there. And one of our, we had a survey, a mid-semester survey, and one of your classmates suggested that on weeks where there is a big paper that we decrease the workload. So we are going to like just automatically grant you 2 points this week for your soft chalk lesson. So we're going to take something off your plate. And there's still a lot of good information in the soft chalk lesson, but that's in the video this week. So just to let you know, just take one more thing off your plate when we have big assignments due. And I think that's a really good idea. Right. Well, Brandon and I will stick around for the next couple of minutes in case any of you want to talk to us one-on-one. But thank you all for coming tonight. I'm hoping that this was helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. I love that picture of you and the kangaroo.
So would there be a potential for those soft chalks that you guys are going to go ahead and give us the points for on those weeks to be like extra credit in case we got points deducted for?
I didn't think about that. Well, I already gave, well, we might have some more extra credits coming up because we have, Brandon, do you have to do another video?
Yeah, I may have to do another video, but we definitely will probably ask for more survey data, which we may offer points for that as well. So
okay, awesome.
Yes, so we did the 3 points extra credit last time because Brandon, which we gave everybody who submitted a survey. So we will definitely do that. I'm not saying no, Christian, but I'm just thinking of like how I can do this in gradebook because I already assigned everybody the 2 points this week. So with gradebook, I'm not sure how I would do that,
Right.
but I'm not opposed to it. I'm just in my head trying to figure out how I can do it.
Okay, well, just a thought, throwing it out there.
Yes, but we'll have some more. We will definitely have some more extra credit. And like, I've had some students reach out to me saying like I missed a few weeks, and I've said just go ahead and do them. Like, we will give you credit for weeks missed. But don't feel like even though it's past the deadline that like you have to lose those points forever too. If there's anything, I don't think you've really missed anything though, Christian.
No, I mean, I'm not concerned about my grade at all. But I had just thought, in case, let's say I missed a couple points on the logic model or the upcoming assignments, or I mean, even others that may need some extra credit or whatever, it might help them out too. So,
Yes. Okay. Well, we'll make sure we'll build some more extra credit into the course too.
okay. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Christian.
You're
Have a
welcome.
good night.
You too.
Okay. I am going to, I think, stop recording.